Hello, you're listening to the Read Anything Lately podcast. I'm Isaac.
And I'm Jason.
And I think that the gain on the microphone might be too high, which means that this episode might be like louder or quieter than a normal one. You might have to turn your volume up or down. I'm not sure exactly what gain is, or how it works, or how it transfers from the recording process to the listening process. I'm just looking at that little line that the little lines bounce out of, and they're going a lot further from the line than they normally do.
I mean, would you say it's a problem worth re-recording over, or should we just keep up with this one?
I don't know. I mean, it also seems to be picking me up more than you. Move a little closer to the microphone. All right, now say something.
Hi, I'm Jason.
Okay, that looks like it's about evened out.
All right. So.
Yeah.
Isaac.
Yeah.
Read anything lately?
Well, I've read kind of a lot of things lately.
I see.
I just started this new book, which I would like to name drop, and I think I'm the last guy in America to discover this book, but I just started reading The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. It's really fantastic. I think it may be the most book clubbed book in the world, but I don't know, but it seems like the kind of book that a book club would read. But it's a really good book. I've really been enjoying it. And I just wanted to name drop that for, because I was a sort of shellfish or mollusk-like creature living under a rock at the bottom of the ocean and had not heard of the Joy Luck Club. Well, so if you're one of those other mollusks, you should get out and read it.
I clearly must be of a similar species, since I also have not heard of this book.
All right. Well, I'll mention it briefly. There's a different book I want to get to as the primary subject of the episode, and I haven't finished the Joy Luck Club yet. But the Joy Luck Club, it's by Amy Tan. It was written in, I think, the late 80s. And it is fundamentally, it is about a group of 4 Chinese women, immigrants to the United States, first-generation immigrants, who meet up every couple of weeks, to play mahjong, and talk and catch up on their lives and hang out. And they all have daughters who are all second-generation immigrants, and who are all, none of them know the ways of the old country or speak Mandarin or anything, these 4 daughters. And the book starts when one of these old women has died, and her daughter has taken her place in the club. Mm-hmm. And it's this really good, family drama. But the book I want to get to is, it's very different from the Joy Luck Club. And maybe we'll get to some other books I've read lately, but this is the one I really wanted to talk about, is Don Quixote,
yes.
Volume 1. I have not read the second volume. I consider it a separate book. Miguel de Cervantes definitely thought it was a separate book. He released it 10 years later. So I have only read the first volume. So temporally, I'm between 1605 and 1615. I'm in that interval. And Don Quixote is a Spanish novel. It is sometimes, I would say, falsely considered the first novel. It is certainly a candidate for the first novel. There's a number of books written in Japan and China before Don Quixote, and those are, I would say, definitely novels. So it's also sometimes called the first Western novel. I also wouldn't say that. The Adventures of Gargantua and Pantagruel, I haven't read it, but it seems very novelicious.
How much does it predate it by?
Oh, probably 30 years. Mm-hmm. So Don Quixote is interesting to me because it seems to me to be the first deconstruction of the novel. You're always hearing every book these days is a postmodernist deconstruction, right?
Yeah.
So basically what it means for something to be postmodernist is for it to blur the line between map and territory. Mm-hmm. You imagine that a book contains words which represent a world, and the book with the words in it is the form or the structure, and then what's in it is the representation, is the symbol. But in a postmodernist book, those things can get kind of merged. So the first postmodernist novel is a book I also read. It was released about 150 years after Don Quixote. It's called The Life and Opinions of Tristram, Shandy, Gentleman.
Oh yeah, you've talked about that one.
So I guess I'm going to be talking mostly about postmodernism and deconstruction, which are two literary buzzwords you're going to hear a lot. And I'm going to tell you about them through the lens of Don Quixote and Tristram Shandy. In postmodernism, the structure of the book begins to blend with the content of the book.
Mm-hmm.
So in Tristram Shandy, the premise is that this guy, Tristram Shandy, the book is actually by a man named Lawrence Sterne, but he writes in the first person as a character named Tristram Shandy, and he tells you his life story. And the way in which the structure begins to blend with the fiction is that Tristram Shandy does not tell his life story directly. Tristram Shandy, the narrator, is as much a character, or more a character, than Tristram Shandy, the character navigating the plot of the book. So that this narrator is always getting distracted and going off on tangents. So, for instance, he starts out the book by saying, he says, first we're going to start with my conception. And he tells you about how he was conceived. And then he's like, and then it's not graphically. In fact, if you don't read it closely, it's a little hard to tell that his mother and father are having sex. It's a little hard to tell what's even happening, is how delicately he describes it. But he does tell you about his own conception. And then he says, what's really important to tell you next is how I ended up being born with my nose crushed flat to my face. But before we can get to that, I need to tell you about the Parson Yorick, who was the preacher of the parish to which my parents belonged. And then he tells you extensively about Parson Yorick. And then he goes, oh, wait a minute, I just remembered. It was important to know about Parson Yorick that he had this horse.
Oh, my God.
And this horse, in fact, this is funny, he says it was full brother to Rocinante. Rocinante is Don Quixote's incredibly shitty horse. I'm sorry, we try not to use that kind of strong language here. Rocinante is Don Quixote's incredibly recalcitrant and sluggish horse.
There we go.
So he says, I gotta tell you about his horse. Now, his horse was, hold on, I need to tell you something. Parson Yorick could never take an insult and let it go, unheeded, and so he gets to about page 35 or 40, just telling you about Parson Yorick.
So is this book kind of like a deconstruction of the sort of first-person narratives?
I would say, so, I don't know if this book is a deconstruction of anything. Maybe it'll turn out to be.
More like a parody, then?
Well,
or is it just kind of, it's not really written with any sort of satire in mind, it's just written entirely straight, right?
Let me just get through first, describing its postmodernism, because I think it's interesting what you're saying about it being a parody of a first-person narrative.
Yeah.
But so it is a postmodernist novel, although it is actually before the modernist era, but it's postmodernist in this way that it takes him 3 volumes to get to his own birth. If this book was just the life of Tristram Shandy, told straight, told without any interaction between the narration and the content of the book, that wouldn't happen, right? Just the idea that the character of the narrator can affect what you are seeing is a postmodernist idea. And in this case, it transforms the entire story. The entire story is these tangents. By the time the book ends, the character of Tristram Shandy is only 17 years old, and we have only seen 4 incidents, or maybe 5, from his entire life. So we get to about 1 life event every 2 volumes of that book. It is almost all the tangents concern the Parson Yorick, his father Walter Shandy, or his uncle Toby Shandy, or his uncle Toby's servant Trim.
And are any of these, are the tangents still entertaining to read?
Oh no, they're incredibly boring. Yes, they're interesting.
Okay.
He didn't make a book out of boring tangents. The book is extremely funny, and it's also full of interesting, philosophy. There's a part where Corporal Trim, Uncle Toby's servant, opens up a book, and a bookmark falls out, which turns out to be a sermon, and he reads the sermon aloud, and it's a really cogent theological discourse. Part of it is parlayed into comedy, because he's reading it, and his brother Shandy, Walter Shandy, Tristram Shandy's father, is saying, this is a Protestant sermon. Only a Protestant would write this sermon. And I actually don't remember which between the two is Protestant or Catholic, but the obstetrician, Dr. Slop, because they are waiting for Tristram to be born in this scene. The obstetrician, Dr. Slop, he says, no, it's obviously a Catholic sermon. Listen to this. This is so clearly Catholic. And they're having this argument while Trim is reading it. And then Trim is listing off different kinds of sinners. And he finally gets to, finally, worse even than the, murderer and the hypocrite is the Catholic. And they're like, he said it. So that part is parlayed into comedy, but it's also a completely reasonable theological argument.
I don't know if it was just the way you explained that, but, I don't know if it was just the way you explained it, but it sounds like such a coherent and almost modern-sounding argument. I don't know. It sounds like an argument like real people would have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not just the, from what you're describing, it doesn't really sound like the author, soapboxing. It's, literally just having these characters have a, frankly, rather realistic argument.
No, he's totally a Catholic.
Yeah, exactly. They're even going so far as to say, no, you're wrong. Here's why I'm right. Look at this. Come on, this is obviously Catholic.
And the sermon, I believe, does end up... the sermon ends up speaking out against Catholics, but not knowing anything about Lawrence Sterne, the fact that he was an Irishman living in the 1700s, I bet he was a Catholic.
Yeah.
So I imagine that the sermon is not him soapboxing directly, but the argument makes sense and its points follow. So it's a really interesting book. And so you asked if it was a parody of first-person narratives.
Yeah.
So it could be. The first-person novel certainly did exist. Moll Flanders had been published. I think Robinson Crusoe is first-person. I don't know if Tom Fielding is, but it easily might be. So there were first-person novels at the time. To me, it does not read so much as a parody of the first-person novel.
More of an autobiography.
Well, yeah, as a parody of the autobiography, maybe. Because autobiographies tend to be rather long, and they tend to be much longer than biographies. Because a biographer will say, all right, how much stuff did, I don't know,
Abraham Lincoln.
I don't want to pick, well, yeah, okay. I'm trying to think of someone who really doesn't have as much to say about them. Like Ulysses S. Grant. A biographer can look at Ulysses S. Grant and say, yep, there's 250 pages of Ulysses S. Grant. Okay, maybe when he was a boy, he used to have a friend who cheated at baseball in the neighborhood or whatever. The audience doesn't need to know that. Nobody needs to know that. A biographer will often be willing to say,
he had a relatively normal childhood.
Exactly. To say, he had an uneventful childhood. The first interesting moment in Ulysses S. Grant's life happened when he was 16, and he, they're willing to skip what is actually not required. But autobiographies tend to be long. Mark Twain's autobiography is more than 700 pages.
Wow.
And he was indisputably an interesting man who led an interesting life and had many adventures. I don't imagine that he actually had 700-odd pages of things to say. Although his autobiography is a comedy with many tangents, just like Tristram Shandy. Or if you look at any politician or any president except Donald Trump, their autobiography is incredibly long. Donald Trump's autobiography is called The Art of the Deal. It is 200 and something pages of large print text and doesn't mention his wife or children. But other than that, with the exception of Donald Trump, every politician's autobiography is incredibly long, even though there's rarely more than 300 pages to say about them.
Yeah.
And this is true of all kinds of people. Anybody's autobiography will be much longer than a biography because people love to talk about themselves, and they never know when to stop. And so I think Tristram Shandy is more a parody of the autobiography.
Yeah.
In the sense, and also in the sense of anybody who just cannot get to the point.
So when was this book written?
This book was written between 1759 and 1768 continuously.
Had the concept of an autobiography even been invented?
I believe so, yes. Certainly some ancient Greeks and Romans must have written their autobiographies.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure they had been. I know Benjamin Franklin wrote an autobiography 20 years later, so one piece of very famous philosophy that appears in Tristram Shandy is when Uncle Toby has a fly buzzing around his head, and instead of swatting it, he catches it and goes and opens the window and lets it out the window, and he says something like, "Go on, you poor devil, surely the Lord made the world wide enough for you and me," and closes the window after it.
I think I've heard that line before.
Yeah, it's pretty famous. So this is generally what is meant by postmodernist. It can be any number of things. Like, it doesn't have to be that the narrator is screwing with the book. For instance, the book If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, the book screws with the book. The book is the plot of If on a Winter's Night a Traveler is you, the reader, are trying to read If on a Winter's Night a Traveler and are having trouble finding where the book begins, or something to that effect. That is the plot of that book.
Wait, so it's like, it's from a second person perspective and it's describing you trying to read a book?
I think so. Or the short story, this is the title of the story, which also appears several times in the story itself, is it's also postmodernist, right? The structure of the story is that every sentence of the story references itself in some way, and it is written under that constraint. The classic line of that story, there are two great ones. This is the last line of the story, which has been mistakenly placed here instead of at the end, which is, I think, the end of the third paragraph or something. And another one is, this sentence attempts to actually accomplish something where all the previous ones have only referenced themselves, but fails. So that short story is hilarious. And it's a classic work of postmodernism. Postmodernism is all about the map interfering with, or the territory interfering with the map, or the map interfering with the territory. And that is postmodernism, and it was invented by Lawrence Stern, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
So then, the other thing that every book today is it's a deconstruction. Everything's a postmodernist deconstruction. And I'm trying to demystify these terms. So a deconstruction is when you take something and you give an example of it, but in giving the example,
You kind of break down how it actually works.
right,
And how it would work.
you can think of it as like, a deconstruction of a watch would be a real watch, but every piece is like labeled with what it does. Or maybe a demonstration where you hold up every piece, say how it works, and then put it together and it's a watch. But these are kind of bad metaphors, so I'll give you a real example. So throughout, basically from the invention of the printing press to 1605, a span of just short of 200 years, there was an extremely popular genre of popular fiction in Europe, the tales of knight-errantry. And some of the real famous ones in Spain were Amadis de Gaul and El Cid.
Oh, yeah.
And Le Morte d'Arthur was the big famous one in England and in France. There's in like Western European, or I guess outside of Spain, basically, the knight-errantry stories are thought to be divided into the Matter of England and the Matter of France, which follow King Arthur and King Charlemagne, respectively. In Spain, they have somewhat their own version, and I bet other countries have their own versions as well. This was like the Stephen King novel and the Michael Crichton and the Danielle Steele of 1500s. Like, everyone wanted these books, which were deeply unrealistic novels about knights, Lancelot, Amadis de Gaul, these guys.
Fairies.
Fairies, wizards, princesses, dragons, giants, running around. These knights would run around, they would save princesses, they would fight dragons, they would kill evil enchanters and giants. And there was a great deal of unrealism, not only at this kind of high level of, well, there's no such thing as a dragon, but even the incidental or everyday elements of these stories would be unrealistic. Like,
The whole Fisher King thing. And like the Salmon of Wisdom or whatever. Like, no.
Fisher King?
Yeah, the Fisher King.
What about him?
I don't know, like this guy, he's like the king of this kingdom, but then he gets his dick cut off, and now he's not the king anymore, and he's like a fisher guy. He's living on the river. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I had heard he was injured in a particular way, represented by a spear covered in blood. and he needs the Holy Grail to fix him up.
I think so, yeah.
But I'm more talking about like in these stories, a knight will always pick a woman, and will sort of worship her as a deity, sort of, and never speak to her. But just sort of profess his undying love, and everyone he defeats in combat he sends to go serve her, and then they always will. Uh, you know, certainly when you send when you give a vile criminal who you've just fought in combat and defeated narrowly, and you give this vile murderer the address of a lonely young single woman, nothing bad ever happens, and he always becomes her loyal servant. I cannot think of any other possible outcome to that situation. So even the incidental details of these stories were deeply at odds with reality. And so Miguel de Cervantes thought these books were stupid. He thought a couple of them were, like, okay, but he basically thought the whole genre was stupid and childish. And so he wrote this book, Don Quixote. And Don Quixote, first of all, you read an old book, never gets to the point. You know, if the book is about, I want to say something crude as the premise of the book.
What?
I was gonna say but we've already sworn twice in this episode now, but I do want to say that if a book from more than about 150 years ago is about a guy with a fishing pole for a dick, then you won't meet the guy with the fishing pole for a dick until you're like 200 pages in.
Yeah.
Like you'll start out with that guy's like mother's cousin's best friend's ex-husband and his business failures in investing in silk in India, and then after 200 pages you finally get to the chapter The Man with the Fishing Pole for a Dick, and finally you get to what the book is about. Don Quixote gets to the point on the first page. Don Quixote is about Alonso Quijano, a Spanish hidalgo who is obsessed with reading books of knight errantry. It's all he does. And when he reads too many of them, as he does in the book, he has read too many such books, the moisture is deprived from his brain and he goes mad. And he believes that he is now a knight errant, the mightiest of them all in all the lands. And so this is where the deconstruction begins, right? Because this book is about if somebody really acted like the heroes of these books, what would they be like? That is where the deconstruction happens, where you're saying, we're going to make a book about the same kind of guy as all these other books, but we're going to make it realistic, and in doing so, we're going to examine every part of this process and every part of this fiction and show how it works and why it doesn't make sense.
So this book is to medieval fantasy like what The Boys is to superhero comics.
Yeah, I would say it's more like what Watchmen is to superhero comics.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But The Boys is also a pretty good example. Like, The Boys is, yeah, because if somebody really acted like Superman, that would probably not be a particularly psychologically healthy or normal person. Mm-hmm. Like, just if you're gonna, not saying anything about the rules of storytelling, but just about a real person who has those abilities and that attitude, probably would not be like a guy who you'd want to have a beer with. And Don Quixote is very much that kind of story. He's so it kind of takes every part of the process. So for instance, he comes up with his name, and it's said he spends 6 days coming up with his name. And so it's a very minor thing, but we're just kind of getting like, haha, don't these guys have kind of weird names? So he takes the name Don Quixote, which is just Sir Quixote. And by taking his name Quijano, which is a real Spanish name, and changing it to Quixote, he changes his name to a local dialect word for a horse's rump. And so it's kind of like, haha, don't they have silly names? And then he picks his fair lady, and I don't remember her real name because he gives her
Yeah, well, I mean, he calls her like Dulcinea.
Yeah, he calls her Dulcinea del Toboso. Not her name. I don't remember. I know her real name is in the book, but I don't remember what it is.
Isn't it like Maria or something?
I don't think it's Maria. I feel like it's Lucinda.
Oh, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Anyway.
So he gives her this name, which is not her name, and he gets his horse, Rocinante, which is this terrible, crappy horse, but he always insists it's the best. And he proceeds to do all of the adventures of a knight errant, but in every one of them, the realistic consequences follow, which are about half the time him getting beaten up by a gang of guys. So I'll just give you some examples of his adventures so you can sort of see how this book runs. For instance, here is the most famous adventure of Don Quixote comes after he has... the first adventure of Don Quixote is that he tries to get himself knighted. So what he has to do is find a castle and get the governor of that castle to dub him a knight. And what he'll have to do is he'll have to spend all night watching his arms and armor, or standing vigil in his arms and armor, and then in the morning the governor will knight him. So he goes to an inn, and he immediately goes up to the tavern owner. First of all, he walks past two prostitutes at the entrance, and he bows to them because he thinks they're noble women. And then he goes inside, and he thinks that the innkeeper is a governor. And so he bows down to him, and he says, you, governor of this fine castle, will you make me a knight? And so the innkeeper is like, yeah, man, sure, whatever. So Don Quixote goes out to stand watch over his arms and armor and wait to be knighted. And two mule drivers sneak out and try to beat him up. And he smashes one of their heads with his lance. And I believe the people of the inn get together and beat him up or something. But the point is that this guy, is crazy. There are no castles in regular Spanish society of 1605. So this guy is just going to any old building and he's like, hey, will you knight me? And this practice of knights, which was never how it actually worked, and was only how it worked in fiction books, is called into question here. It's like, so, he's just going to go into some guy's house. Like, even if this was a castle, he's just going to go into some other guy's building where he lives and ask to be made a knight. Is that really how it works? And then the next thing we get from him is a similarly ridiculous escapade, which more profoundly highlights one of the issues with these tales of knight errantry. He comes across a farm boy being whipped by his master, and he finds out from the farm boy while he's interrupting this whipping that the farmer has not been paying the farm boy either. And the farmer says, well, I've deducted expenses from his wages. Twice I've had to have the doctor in to let his blood, and once I've needed to buy new leather for his shoes. And Don Quixote, after the fashion of these... Marvel movies did not invent the one-liner. Knights in these books would say ridiculous, annoying, clever things to each other. And Don Quixote imitates this, where he says, well, surely... he's already paid for all the blood the doctor has drawn in the blood you've taken from him by whipping him, and surely he's paid as much hide in the whipping you've given him as the hide you needed to repair his shoes. And so you will not deduct either of those things from his wages. You'll stop whipping him and pay him immediately, or I shall annihilate you. And the farmer says, okay, I swear on my sacred honor that I will do that. And Don Quixote says, okay, and leaves. Because knights are always taking people's sacred honor. They're always saying, swear fealty and go to serve my lady. And they don't even imagine that the guy will rob and kill the incredibly rich, defenseless woman with the gold stacked to the bridle of a horse in her house. No, that'll never happen. They swear on their sacred honor. And even a villain's sacred honor can be trusted.
It is kind of weird. Well, I mean, did he told the guy to swear on his sacred honor, or did the guy, do that on his own? Like he said, I swear on my sacred... does the book imply that he himself has read a few of those stories and kind of knows what this nut is talking about?
I don't know. I don't know if the farmer has realized what kind of situation... A lot of people see him and have no idea what he's dressed like or who he's supposed to be. Because they just are not big readers.
Is he wearing, actual armor?
He's wearing mostly a suit of actual armor, but the visor of his helmet is cardboard.
Yeah.
And he carries a real shield and a real sword and a real lance. All of it is real except the visor of the helmet of the armor.
They had cardboard back then?
Yep, they had cardboard. Pasteboard, which is the same thing.
Oh, okay.
More or less the same thing. So, this farmer man swears on his sacred honor that he will stop abusing the farm boy, and Don Quixote's like, okay, and the farm boy says, wait, don't don't leave, like make sure he actually gives over the money, and Don Quixote's like, no, he's given his word, and he rides off, and the farmer immediately goes back to whipping the boy.
Oh my god.
So and doesn't give him the money, and this is another. This is a more serious example of a deconstruction where it's saying, look, we're going to do morality like those books do. We're going to show you a hero behaving in exactly the same way as a hero behaves in Amadis de Gaul, taking people's sacred honor, making demands of the populace, except we're going to show what really happens.
They don't do anything.
They don't do anything. That's sort of the through line of the book, and it's generally what people mean when they say that, for instance, if they say that something is a deconstruction of the popular romance novel, they mean it's going to be doing the same thing as Don Quixote. It's going to be taking you through the tropes and taking you through the standard events, but is going to be showing them in a different or more realistic light.
Don Quixote sounds like a very cynical kind of book. Would you say that it is?
I would say that Don Quixote, it's not. I wouldn't say it's all that cynical. I mean, what about it seems cynical to you?
I don't know, just the fact that like Don Quixote is like treated as an absolute nut, and like even though he is crazy and he does have good intentions, it's just he keeps doing the wrong thing and then getting beaten up for it, and that feels like, I don't know, kind of cynical take on the whole medieval on the whole parody or deconstruction of medieval literature and fantasy. Like, it sounds like Don Quixote never really gets his way or is able to actually help anybody, just keeps being an idiot and getting beaten up.
I mean, yeah, it's true that he himself does very little and usually makes the situation worse. So he pretty quickly ends up with a squire, Sancho Panza, who he tells that he says, look, we knights errant are always taking over kingdoms or acquiring land on some far-off exotic island. And when that happens, we always ride off into the sunset to more adventures and leave our squire in charge. So he's like, this is going to be great for you. Sancho Panza then never shuts up about getting his kingdom for the rest of the book. So, yeah, he makes stuff worse. He takes this guy away from his family, takes him off on these gallivanting nonsense adventures. But there are a lot of people who are not Don Quixote who make situations better, or who help people. I'm trying to remember exactly the details, but at a certain point there comes about this very complicated love triangle-esque situation where essentially the wrong man has ended up with the wrong woman, and then there's also a man who's now crazy in the forest and a woman who's like pining in the city, and there's all this nonsense, and the parson and the barber are following Don Quixote around because they want to trap him and bring him back to the city where he can hopefully be rehabilitated. And because they are present when Don Quixote meets these people, the parson and the barber end up figuring out what's going on and rearranging the couples properly and addressing all the dishonors and the wrongs and so on.
So it's less like Don Quixote is less an agent of good and more an agent of change. Like, everywhere he goes, things kind of are... everywhere he goes, things kind of change. Or I don't want to say like an agent of chaos, but like he's trying to fulfill these fantasies of his, but he doesn't realize that the real change he's creating is happening without his knowledge.
Yeah, he does a lot of stuff where he is completely unaware of the consequences even. He'll do something and we'll understand the consequences of his actions, but he will not. For instance, there's there's a major example of this when there's these guys who are leading 6 incredibly dangerous criminals through the forest, and they're all like chained, and one of them is this guy who's in like full like Hannibal Lecter chains. He's bound completely. There's like a gag in his mouth, and we get these 5 guys who confess their crimes because Don Quixote is always stopping people on the road and being like, "Hey, what's your story?" So they're exchanging what's going on, and 5 of the prisoners tell their stories, and they all say these ridiculous little things like, "Well, my only crime was love. That's what I'm in here for love. Yeah, love of a huge pile of gold that wasn't mine, and stealing it." And then that he's like, "And for this, I'm being sent to the colony for 4 years." And then it gets worse and worse until eventually there's this guy, and I think he killed some children or something, and he's like, "For that, I'm being sent to the colony for 7 years or something." And then all we hear about the last guy is the guards say, "He's in for 10 years." So whoever this guy is, he's someone really bad, and it's Gines de Pasmont is this guy's name. So Don Quixote, because he's an idiot, is like, you damned slavers keeping these innocent men in bondage, and he beats them up, and he frees these prisoners. At which point Gines de Pasmont immediately says, "Well, look, these 2 guys obviously know our faces, and if we run away now, this Don Quixote and Sancho Panza guy are going to be able to tell the authorities which way we went." And he leads the other 5 prisoners into beating up Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, and then they all run off in different directions.
Do they not kill him?
They don't kill him. So then we get Don Quixote and Sancho Panza traveling through the hills, and Sancho Panza has got this mule, and he loves this mule. Or he doesn't love this mule, but he really likes to have a mule to ride. Mm-hmm. And the reason I mention this, it's mostly something you find out later, because in the middle of the night, unbeknownst to Don Quixote or Sancho Panza, they never find out who's responsible. Gines de Pasmont sneaks into their camp and steals Sancho Panza's mule and rides off. For the rest of the book, Sancho Panza does not shut up about his mule, and about how he wants his mule back, and is always looking for an opportunity to get another mule. And Don Quixote never finds out that he is responsible for this accident. Or for this deliberate theft, rather. He never finds out that he had anything to do with that situation, or that it was Gines de Pasmont, or that he freed Gines de Pasmont and not some other guy. Like, he is unaware of how his actions affect the world around him.
Like, how delusional is he? Like, is it more like he literally sees everything differently, or more just his brain is so messed up that he just, he has his own interpretation of the world and he refuses to listen to anybody else?
I think it's a little hard to say.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it seems that he is seeing the same world as anybody else. There are moments that put it in doubt as to whether he is literally hallucinating or has problems merely with interpretation. Mm-hmm. For instance, at one point he sees a brass barber's basin as a golden helmet, and brass does look quite a lot like gold. And so there's a feeling of he must be seeing what it actually looks like to be saying it's a gold helmet and not a steel helmet. Mm-hmm. He must actually be seeing the basin in order to make the interpretation of it that he does. The strongest evidence for him literally hallucinating is
the windmills.
Is Don Quixote's courageous adventure with the windmills, and all the chapter titles are sarcastic. So I weakly tried to imitate it just then, but it's something like the unbelievable and never to be replicated adventure of Don Quixote in courageous battle against the windmills, or something. It's a surprisingly brief section of the book. Don Quixote spots windmills on a distant hilltop and says, "Oh my God, giants!" And Sancho Panza, who believes wholeheartedly Don Quixote's story that he is a knight-errant, but is perfectly able to perceive the world in every detail, says, "Those are windmills." Like, Sancho Panza totally believes that Don Quixote is a knight, that he's a genius man of honor, an accomplished hand with a sword or a lance, the greatest horse rider in the country, that he really does have a fair princess that he's sending these all to, that he really is going to get an island or a kingdom for Sancho Panza. He believes all of these things totally, but he is not delusional. He has swallowed the story, but in every specific instance, he really sees what's in front of his eyes. So he says, "No, master, you're mistaken. Those are windmills." And Don Quixote says, "Coward, stay behind then!" And he charges on his horseback toward the windmills, at which point, when he gets there, one of the arms of the windmill hits him and sends him flying off his horse, and he smashes into the ground and he gets all beat up. And when Sancho comes up to him, he's like, "Master, why didn't you listen to me when I told you they were windmills?" Don Quixote, he looks up at the windmills, and there's like, I feel like there's some description of him kind of rearranging his thoughts, and he says, "Some enchanter must have come along and turned these giants into windmills." So once it's right in front of his eyes, literally right there in front of him, he's like, he's not still insisting it's a giant.
Yeah.
Their evidence will convince him to the contrary that he is seeing a windmill, but he says, "Yeah, an enchanter came along, turned them into windmills."
Maybe the concussion like kind of rearranged his brain for a second, and like he saw it for what it was.
If blows to the head were capable of making Don Quixote sane, then he would be the sanest man in all of Spain.
That's fair.
He is hit in the head more than any other fictional character I've ever read.
I mean, honestly, and maybe that's like another thing. It's like another bit of the deconstruction is like, hey, these knights get hurt like all the time. You know, maybe Don Quixote, part of his madness or part of his increasing madness is the fact that he keeps being like, you know, even if the idea of a concussion wasn't really a thing, like there could still be some understanding that like Don Quixote has taken way, way, way too many blows to the head and body to have really any shred of his sanity left, if any was left after his. Is it like a gradual process? Or is
No, it's right. It's just.
Yeah.
There's a bit about that, and we're gonna have to wrap up pretty soon, right?
Yeah, I have to be out here by 3:30, so that'll take us to like a clean hour.
Okay. Yeah, there's a partial deconstruction of the idea of this, how do they always bounce back? So he mentions, and I assume this must have been a common plot device in knight-errantry tales of the time, that a wizard taught him a recipe for an elixir that will cure any injury. He says, even if you were to be cut in half at the waist, you would need only drink this elixir and be right as rain. So this elixir, which he has Sancho Panza make, is I don't remember what's in it, but it's just disgusting. It's just the most disgusting thing in the world. One of the early adventures of Don Quixote is the courageous adventure with the Biscayner. Biscayers were part of an ethnic group in Spain at the time, and he challenges the guy to a sword fight, and he fights him and he wins, but before he does, the Biscayner cuts his ear off, or most of his ear off. So he's bleeding all over the place, and he's like, "Fetch me the elixir," and he drinks it. Nothing happens. He insists that it has worked. His ear is still gone, visibly gone. Or another time when Sancho Panza is very savagely beaten, he drinks the elixir and he just throws up everything in his stomach. It just does not work at all. It just makes everything worse. It's a completely useless concoction.
I think it is kind of funny that the elixir comes back later.
Oh yeah, it's come back all throughout the whole book.
Yeah.
You're constantly coming across this stupid elixir.
Well, do you think then? I don't know if this is really worth talking about, but do you think Don Quixote kind of debuted the idea of a running gag in a story?
I was gonna say that, and I don't think so, because I know Gargantua and Pantagruel, for instance, is a comedy. I know Shakespeare uses a running gag in Much Ado About Nothing, at least one. The character of Dogberry, who is constantly like screwing up his speech. The things he says do not make sense. Is Dogberry's thing, and he does that throughout the whole thing. So I think it is from before Don Quixote that the idea of a running gag originates. You should look up when, especially you, the listener, should look up Dogberry's claim that the people disgracing him are lying, because it is one of the funniest passages. I'm not incredibly versed in Shakespeare, but it is one of the funniest Shakespeare things I've ever seen. It is hilarious. So, the book definitely does have many running gags, and it is what's interesting is that eventually you get to a point where you start getting some what would be the term? Like, positive examples. Because the book ends with about 150 pages spent in a tavern where those four people I mentioned earlier who were all star-crossed lovers, that once they all get their couples together and everyone's okay, more and more people start coming in and telling their stories and their adventures. And these are different people who we've never met before. And I believe ultimately two groups of people come in and tell their long stories of like adventure and so on. And these people's stories are completely realistic. There's no enchanters, there's no giants, there's no magic, I think there's kind of a princess in one of them. But the point is that these people come in and they tell their life stories and how they ultimately defeated the odds and got their happy endings. And so these people are like the gallant to Don Quixote's Goofus.
Yeah.
Don Quixote is this guy who ultimately professes to the trappings of heroism. He wears the armor, he carries the shield, he wields the lance, he rides the horse, he says the things, but he doesn't do anything heroic. And he is contrasted at the end of the novel with these people who have genuinely taken action to improve their lives and make the world a better place through heroism and intellect. And these people are the counterpoint to Don Quixote. And, they're not, they're, 60-page interruptions each to the story of funny Lancelot man. But without them, the novel kind of falls apart because without them, the novel is proposing a problem with no solution.
Mm-hmm. It's saying, like, oh, haha, look at how stupid these ideals of chivalry and gallantry are. Heroism is dumb. Look at this guy. He thinks he's a hero, but he's actually an idiot, and he gets beat up a lot. But then, yeah, like, with those people who are telling these tales of actual heroics and actual, like, bravery and cunning and compassion, it's kind of a contrast. Like, Don Quixote thinks he's a hero, but is nothing more than a fool. But the story is not trying to say that all heroes are fools. It's simply that heroism takes, like, true cunning, intelligence, bravery, and an understanding of the situation and the guts to see it through.
Right. And there's also a feeling that Don Quixote meddles in other people's lives.
Yeah.
Like, he tries to impose his reality on other people's. Like, when he's trying to help that farm boy, it's not so much that trying to defend him is the meddling in his life. It's the insistence on his own brand of help, of saying, I'm going to help you the knight-errant way, the, trusting a villain's word and sending him off to serve my fair Dulcinea del Toboso way, rather than being like, what's the best way to help you out of this situation? Yeah. Whereas with those guys at the end who come in and tell their stories, one of these guys is this guy who ends up the prisoner, the slave of a North African aristocrat, and ends up running away with his daughter and bringing her back to Spain and converting her to Christianity and marrying her. And so this guy kind of shows the opposite, because the way he escapes is by asking the aristocrat's daughter, like, how are we going to get out of here? Because she knows the territory, she knows her father, she knows the customs of the country. She's seen hundreds or thousands of white slaves pass through this country. Many of them get back home. He's like, you obviously know this situation better. This is your domain. How does this place work? And that is a large part of how he gets his happy ending, is by having the opposite attitude of Don Quixote.
He's willing to ask for help.
Well, not even quite that, but willing to live in somebody else's world. Mm-hmm. He's willing to be like, this is your world, obviously. This is not my world. This is not where I'm from. How does this place work?
I think there's a thing that I wanted to ask, but it might kind of reveal the ending of the book. So
sure.
Should I ask it?
Ask it. Well, the question or the answer will reveal the ending of the book.
The answer will reveal the
Then just fire away the question and I'll answer it if I want.
I believe does Don Quixote end up, like, kind of cured by the end? Like, he ends up sane?
So
That might be the second volume, but
yeah, I don't know. I have the second volume. I have not yet read the second volume. What I've been told is that in the second volume, he is much less delusional.
yeah.
That he is still delusional. He still thinks he's a knight errant, but he isn't quite as foolish and ridiculous. And he mostly, understands what's going on around him and how to take action within it, except that he also thinks he's a knight errant.
So basically, the second half of Don Quixote is like it's almost like, would you say it's character development or just kind of a shift?
I haven't read the second half, so I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, and it's kind of interesting to see like a figure like Don Quixote kind of grow. You know, if that is what actually happens, like he kind of grows out of that delusional stage and becomes like, he still thinks he's a knight. He still thinks he's like a knight errant and there's princesses and dragons and stuff. But he at least now realizes, wait a minute, hold on, I actually realize what's going on now, and I actually need to fix things the way they're meant to be fixed, and not the way I think they're supposed to be fixed. And I think that's kind of an interesting shift with the character, to see this guy who thinks guy who's thought he's a hero this entire time finally start to learn how to really be one. And to kind of tie this all up, because we have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say closing thoughts.
Yeah, how would you say these two books kind of like tie together? I think the way I'm seeing it is like, it's kind of, long books filled with tangents, but they're both like deconstructions of kind of common, or at least like common concepts or ideas at the time, and it's less meant to be cynical and more just meant to be a postmodernist deconstruction. Tristram Shandy is taking these ideas of like these philosophical debates and this idea of like an autobiography that goes off in a billion different directions. Whereas Don Quixote is this book about a crazy guy who tries to live up to the ideals of being a knight errant and fails horribly. And both of these stories seem like they're taking these extremely common ideas and trying to tell like a new and unique story, discussing,
Well, yeah. Go on.
No, like just picking them apart, either maybe discussing how they work or just kind of like even playing kind of a joke on them. They both seem like more comedic in nature. So what would you say is the nature of this?
I would say Don Quixote is more or less full descendant from Don Quixote. Don Quixote
is full descendant from Don Quixote?
No, Tristram Shandy is full descendant from Don Quixote. Lawrence Stern references Don Quixote all the time. Mm-hmm. When he says the horse is full brother to Rocinante, he says at one point that someone takes fully as many blows on the head as Sancho Panza. When he has a scene where he has someone saying that women shouldn't be allowed to read funny books, and he gives us his example, for instance, Don Quixote. So there's all this stuff in it, all this Don Quixote reference. He loved this book. And I think that Tristram Shandy is almost a Don Quixote for the modern era, in the sense that Don Quixote is a guy who imitates popular fiction, but he imitates this lost ideal of the knight errant. And by the 1760s, knight errants were not just obsolete as they were in the 1600s, but actual history, as in they don't exist anymore. Nobody's ever seen one. In the sense that nowadays, a flip phone is merely obsolete, whereas a Model T car is actually history. It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So knight errants had completely gone. Tristram Shandy is almost like a guy who's Don Quixote for being a normal person.
Yeah.
Or for being an interesting person. He kind of takes up his ridiculous disguise, but instead of a suit of armor, it's writing a book. And instead of tilting at windmills, he runs at these ridiculous ideas. Instead of chasing windmills, he's chasing his own mind around in circles, and is just painting this ridiculous parody. Just as Don Quixote puts on the trappings of heroism, this guy is sort of putting on the trappings of telling his life story, and is completely failing to actually execute what he said he was going to do.
He's trying to live up to the ideal of an interesting man.
Yes. Although even the character of the narrator of Tristram Shandy is pretty interesting. He's just not really interesting in the way he thinks he is. And he's not telling his life story in the way he thinks he is. you can ultimately see by reading the book how he got to be how he got to be by seeing how his father and his uncle have influenced him. His mother didn't influence him because the book was written in the 1760s. But you can see how these people have influenced him and why he grew up to be the way he was, but not on purpose. He's just getting sidetracked in stories about these guys.
And I think that's kind of like, to kind of close it out, I think that's kind of an interesting way to kind of handle this deconstruction, is to be like, the points being made here are not necessarily points that the characters themselves are learning, but rather points that are being told through the story and through the events.
That's very much what's going on. The target of the theme of Don Quixote is not Don Quixote. And the target of the theme of Tristram Shandy is not Tristram Shandy, although it kind of is, because Tristram Shandy, the narrator mentions, and the author pretty clearly agrees, he quotes Virgil saying something like, "These tangents form not a distraction from the story, but the story itself." And I think another strong theme in Tristram Shandy that really has nothing to do with the deconstruction is that these tangents are valuable. Not only in a novel should you go off on tangents, which is part of the theme. Yeah, you should go off on tangents in a novel. It's delightful. But also, your life should not be the single-minded pursuit of the next event.
Yeah.
You should be going off on whatever to take the side quests, you know. If you see a group of people standing around and you don't know what they're doing, go up and ask. Do stuff that's not part of the plan.
Life is too interesting to stay on one quest forever.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I think we've got everything. I mean, we could talk for a year and not say everything there is to say about these two books. But
yeah.
I think we've said everything that we're going to say in 56 minutes and 47 seconds.
Yep. I would be inclined to agree.
All right. This has been the Read Anything Lately podcast. I've been Isaac.
I've been Jason.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.